Hey guys, what is up? Swim here, and I have a powerful new Runeterra deck for you guys. This is my Dawnspooders deck. And basically, the idea of this deck is fairly straightforward. Very powerful Shadow Isles package, combined with Dawnspeakers and some other death combos of Radiant Guardian and Vanguard Redeemer. This is not a super unique concept because a lot of people who look at Dawnspeakers think about ways to put it with Shadow Isles, but this is my version of the deck. I think that this is an exceptionally powerful deck. This is definitely a contender for the strongest deck in the game. At the current point in time, I need to basically, be able to, play the game when it's out, and we'll be able to see what deck is actually the strongest. But this is nuts. So as always, I'm just going to let you know, check the pinned comment in the video description. I guess it's not the description, it's the comments, because I will be linking the Mobalytics link to this deck, and if I update the deck, the Mobalytics link will change and this video will not. So you, if you're watching this a little bit later, will be able to see a more improved version of the list if I end up changing a card or two down the road. But this version as it is already very optimized. This is a deck that I've actually been working on for a couple of weeks now, and it's just an idea that I've been playing with, which is, Shadow Isles being built in different ways. The Dawnspeakers is something that I've tried a few different ways to build and eventually kind of came back to this one recently. And I've been working on it with my boys Persipic and Nib. And basically, this is the version we ended up coming to. What I actually decided, I'm going to talk about this deck for a while because there's actually a lot to break down here in terms of a lot of little micro decisions that went into all these little numbers. It doesn't look like too much crazy, right? But in terms of the amount of time, I've spent basically hours and hours refining this deck and other similar concepts to this point, and I want to actually get into detail about why those decisions were made, because I think it's very important, especially for aspiring deck builders out there. So if you want to skip to the gameplay, I'm going to leave in my pinned comment a timestamp for when that starts. All right, anyway, to the deck building. So one thing you'll notice is that several of the decks that I've posted recently all use Shadow Isles. That's no mistake. Shadow Isles is really powerful. I would probably call it, at the point in time, the strongest region. Although, of course, that's probably going to change. Riot does. I believe they plan on doing a lot of balance changes for the game. It's a little bit hard to say because it's not out yet, but that's kind of how they handle League. They iterate pretty rapidly. So we'll have to see how it plays out, in the first several weeks, if there's going to be any changes or before the launch. But basically the core combo of just the general Cursed Keeper, Black Spear, Aristocrat, Butcher, Glimpse Beyond, and even Chronicler of Ruin is just a very, very powerful package where you're getting really, really huge value out of your Cursed Keeper and being able to kind of sacrifice it for value. Oblivious Highlander usually fits into that package, but not this deck. So we're going to go ahead and kind of take you through the main points of this deck and how it's going to play out. It's a very aggressive deck, as you can see. You're playing on closing out games very early, and Dawnspeakers is going to be essential to that. Every time you have an ally that dies, you're going to be able to trigger this effect, giving all of your allies, apart from Dawnspeakers, +1/+1. In addition to that, if you have the same criteria, you can draw a unit off of Vanguard Redeemer, or even get some extra points on your Radiant Garden in terms of the keywords Lifesteal and Tough. Okay, there's a lot of little synergies that tie this deck all together, and we're going to go through them now. So Elise, obviously, a pretty great aggro Shadow Isles card, and the little spider she summons is amazing as a sacrifice point for certain cards in a pinch. If you've got something like Glimpse Beyond and you haven't drawn, a Cursed Keeper or anything yet, of course, generating buff targets for Dawnspeakers is just completely necessary, as well as cards that you want to be killed off because you need cards dying for Dawnspeakers to be good, right? So the Elise package is going to do very well there. Then we've got pretty much all the standard Shadow Isles cards in any kind of early game kind of tempo based Shadow Isles deck. You really do have to run pretty much all the cards. I mentioned different ratios of to different degrees, but these are all just great cards and should kind of be the core of any early game skewed Shadow Isles deck. Then there's Crawling Sensation, which is actually a much more niche, and this is the only deck that I am currently running this card in, I think. I might have it in my Yip Shadow Isles deck, but that one's not great, honestly. And this one also fits the deck very well. There's a lot of situations where if the opponent will board wipe you or something like that, you can play like 2 Crawling Sensations and a Dawnspeakers, and you are popping off. Of course, Dawnspeakers checks units that are dying even before the Dawnspeakers is played. So if they open with like an Avalanche and you just play, you know, your 4 Spiders into the Dawnspeakers on turn 5 or something like that, you've got complete control over the board in a really, really absurd way. Of course, Crawling Sensation is a great tool for leveling up Elise as well, who needs 3 Spiders to take that level up. A couple other interesting tools here. Chronicler of Ruin is really, really scalable in this deck. You can kill an ally and then revive it, and the immediate combo that comes to mind is obviously Cursed Keeper. When you use Chronicler of Ruin on Cursed Keeper, you're getting a pretty absurd amount of stats. By reviving the Keeper, you're getting the Escaped Abomination for free, and then you can kill your first Keeper later. So basically, your Chronicler of Ruin is 4 mana for a 3/3 and a 4/4. Which is completely insane. In addition to that, because reviving triggers summon abilities, now keep in mind it doesn't trigger play abilities, but it triggers summon abilities, that means that you can use it on Vanguard Redeemer. In fact, when you kill the Vanguard Redeemer, it actually fulfills Vanguard Redeemer's criteria. So if you have a Vanguard Redeemer on board and you use Chronicler of Ruin on it, the Vanguard Redeemer will come back and draw you a card because a unit has died. The Redeemer just died. And you can always use Chronicler of Ruin on top of, you know, anything else, on something like Hapless Aristocrat. It's not necessarily the worst thing ever, but I wouldn't call it great. But basically, there's just a few targets for this card in this deck, and it does very well. And then we've got Frenzied Skitterer, which is a card that I'd like to try to fit in more decks, but it provides a pretty great function here just for being like generally high value. It pushes the opponents out of range of your own ability to, you know, get over them with Fearsome because it minuses their attack. And most importantly, it does pretty well against Avalanche. So when looking at this deck, you've probably at this point in time noticed one pretty bizarre thing, which is I'm only running 3 champions. I'm only running Elise. And that seems like a pretty bizarre thing, especially because there's some powerful champions I have access to, which are, you know, like Lucian and Fiora. There's nothing really wrong with these champions, and they play at the speed that the deck wants. So why am I not running them? The reason is, so first of all, champions, I really want to state this clearly, champions are very overrated, and that's not really just me being edgy. This is the opinion of, you know, generally a lot of like top players that I've been talking with as well, who have all just been kind of spending the last like 2 months theory crafting about the game. There's just a group of people that have just not stopped talking about the game. And the idea of champions is that they seem very tempting, but it's important not to go out of your way for them, right? You shouldn't feel like you have to run them. There's a lot of good decks that are running 3 champions, right? Because they're a bit above, you know, the average stat line, but they're not really amazing in general. So we have a card like Fiora. So let's break this down. I'm going to explain Fiora first because this is easier. Fiora is a 3-mana card that doesn't do terribly well because we have a lot of other 3s. We've got Dawnspeakers, Skitterer, and Redeemer. So, you know, Fiora is not amazing, but, you know, she is a 3/3 with Challenger. Challenger is not a great card in a super aggressive deck. Challenger cards do okay, typically, but they're often not the best things you have access to because most of what Challenger is it gives you kind of like targeted board control. It's much more of a mid-rangey concept for being able to get value out of your Challenger units, right? So she doesn't really fit the curve that well, and she's not really what we need. Lucian looks really good. He does. But when you think about the deck and when you think about what its weaknesses and what its strengths are, the most important thing to understand about this deck is it's very, very, very powerful, super powerful, to the point where it's effectively only countered by 1 or 2 different things in the game, apart from, you know, just bad draws, which any deck can just kind of like, you know, roll low and the opponent's deck can roll high, and, you know, I mean, you can lose any situation. But the one thing that's going to be common that really, really counters this deck is Avalanche. Okay, so let's take a look at Lucian, and we can compare him to War Chefs. they're actually like pretty similar. And again, it does seem pretty strange as a player to be running War Chefs over Lucian, but the deck is powerful to the point where I don't have to worry about anything except for those situations with Avalanche, which I really do need to worry about. And you'll notice that War Chefs not only is outside of Avalanche range himself, naturally, but on top of that, if I am on offense and if I open attack against an Avalanche deck, which I always will, if they're at a turn where I'm vulnerable to Avalanche, War Chefs will also push the unit that he's supporting out of Avalanche kill range for that turn, because when the buff wears off, it doesn't lose that 1 health back again if it got damaged by Avalanche or got damaged by anything. So War Chefs is a pretty great kind of anti-Avalanche aggro tech, and it fulfills that role in this deck beautifully. It also just kind of like, you know, being able to stay alive against not just Avalanche, but other tools such as Mystic Shot is pretty phenomenal. This is a deck, if you'll look at it, you'll notice that there's not really anything running there's not really anything that Mystic Shot is going to be uniquely countering in this deck, right? And I think this is a really important deck building mentality that a lot of people should think more about when building a deck. Check common answers that your opponent will have, you know, things that will counter a broad range of things. Cards like Deny, and concepts like, you know, dealing a certain amount of damage, dealing 3 damage, dealing 2 damage, dealing just removal in general. And check your deck for things that, you know, get countered by these concepts. If you don't have any, good. You should probably stay that way. If you have like 1 or 2, you definitely want to move out of that spot. You either want to remove some or add more. And if you've got like, you know, 4 or more, you're pretty much good, right? The reason for that being is, you know, typically when you go into a game, you assume that the opponent is going to be playing basically, you know, like 1 or 2 of a specific kind of removal, or, you know, they'll play more, but they'll draw like 1 or 2 of a specific kind of thing. And basically imagine a scenario where we run Lucian. Anyone who's running either Mystic Shot or Black Spear or, you know, Grasp of the Undying or something like that, something that deals 2 or 3 damage, we'll be able to get a decent amount of value off of killing our Lucian that we're not actually enabling anywhere else in my deck, right? There's nothing in my deck that the opponent can get good value out of dealing 2 damage with. Okay, at least for dealing 3 damage. But Mystic Shot in particular, I'm just enabling for free, in addition to, you know, the Avalanche implications, by running Lucian, who isn't really going to be able to level up very easily either, and we don't really have room for a Senna. So for all of those reasons, we end up just putting War Chefs instead. It can be a pretty close call, you know, and there could be a consideration to run possibly 1 or 2 Lucians, but I think it actually barely just doesn't make the cut here. For the most part, you know, champions have very flashy gold borders, but it is important to remember that they're not really uniquely different from normal units. In most situations, you know, given like high level play on both sides, they will often not level up unless you build your deck, you know, around them specifically. There's nothing really like that will cause Lucian to level up here, you know, unless we're running Haunted Relic, which doesn't really work that well here. So he'll level up sometimes, but every deck will have just a way to poke him down before he does. And in reality, he ends up being very similar to Academy Prodigy, the PNZ 3-1 quick attack for 2, which, you know, when you look at him like that, he really just isn't that great. So the most important mentality, don't feel like you have to run champions just because they're champions, and just make sure your deck is supporting itself. Okay, that covers a lot of the deck building decisions here. Oh, we also have 1 Relentless Pursuit, just because this card is pretty sweet, and there's a lot you can do with it just in terms of being able to kind of rush an opponent down before they get an answer. Anyway, that's enough of me windbagging about this deck and deck build. I've been doing these kind of like deck, like the segments of talking about the deck very long. I'm going to be making them, you know, maybe a bit shorter in the future, or I'll just have a thing to like skip to the end or something like that. Okay, so we get into a game here against Spider Swarm, the bot deck, as always. And we've got a pretty unique opening hand right off the bat. This is going to be double Dawnspeakers, Black Spear, Vile Feast. Now, mulligans are a huge skill test in Legends of Runeterra, as with other similar games, and this is a very bizarre hand. You can actually see me sitting here thinking about this for a little while. Dawnspeakers is a very powerful bomb for this deck, and you do definitely want to try to have 1 of it, but you're also really looking for a Cursed Keeper, and 2 Dawnspeakers is no good. So I'll probably kick 1 Dawnspeakers and keep 1 other one. And Vile Feast and Black Spear can probably go. Now I'm against an Elise deck, which means Black Spear could represent being able to kill the opponent's Elise, which is powerful. And Vile Feast isn't bad, but I'm going to dig to find more important options. I really want to find Cursed Keeper or kind of more combo piece things. Vile Feast is good against his deck, but it's really there for high power swings like a Green Glade duo. Okay, so he's going to develop some early units, and we have no answer. I mean, you can just see our hand has nothing. So he's the aggressor in this situation. We can play either Keeper or War Chefs, but no real reason to play Keeper super early. So I figure if I get War Chefs down on the board here, it's going to be totally fine. We can go ahead and just kind of block out this 2/2 spider when it goes ahead and swings into us. There it is. And now we can just get the block. So setting our War Chefs to 1 health, totally fine. But we need to, develop a situation that's going to allow us to stabilize, right? We need to kind of stop taking so much, not take so much damage early, so we can turn the board around without dying or risking dying. So it goes back to us over here. We draw a Crawling Sensation, and this is a pretty unique situation. Check this out. So we've got the War Chefs as a 2/1 on the board, and we've got 4 mana total, 1 spell mana. So we can play Cursed Keeper and then use Glimpse Beyond on it. This would generate the 4/1 Escaped Abomination from Cursed Keeper, and then we'd even draw 2 cards. It's our turn to attack, so we'd have a 4/4 unit that could even attack into the opponent with War Chef as well. This move looks really tempting, but it's actually not the right move in this situation. This is actually a really, really unique play right here. So I'm going to go ahead and pause. I'm going to let you guys guess. If you can guess what the right play is here, go ahead. But basically, this is a situation where, the deck's ability to generate really unique plays comes out. And that is, we're going to go ahead and attack with War Chefs right off the bat. The reason we're going to do this is because we don't want to telegraph that we have Dawnspeakers in hand. We don't want to let him develop another unit, and we don't want to play Dawnspeakers ourselves yet, just because that would accomplish both of those things, right? We actually want to sacrifice the War Chefs, have him block with his Spider, so that then afterwards we can play both the Dawnspeakers and the Crawling Sensation, and Dawnspeakers will buff both of the spiders that come out of Crawling Sensation. The reason this is better is because, of course, we won't have, if we summoned the Cursed Keeper, we're drawing cards early, which isn't helping too much, and the big unit we summon from Keeper is just getting blocked by a 1/1 anyway, so it's not really doing anything. What's much more important here is starting the Dawnspeakers engine off nice and early. And again, if we play the Dawnspeakers first, we get the buff from War Chefs to Dawnspeakers, and we're gonna be able to potentially threaten him to not block, but that would be very, very bad for us, because if we tell him we have Dawnspeakers in hand, he won't block, and that means we won't have one of our units die, and we won't get our buffs. So it all plays out pretty exactly like that. We're going to go ahead and get the full amount of buffs from Dawnspeakers going off. Keep in mind, this is retroactive. Even though Dawnspeakers wasn't on the board when an enemy died, it still counts the enemy died that turn. So take it to the next turn. Opponent's got token this time, and we draw another Crawling Sensation, which is pretty great. They develop an Arachnoid Horror, and this time the obvious play of Cursed Keeper with Glimpse Beyond is just going to be the best one here. Now that we've got the Dawnspeaker developed, nothing else really fancy to do. This is for sure the right play. A second Arachnoid Horror by the opponent actually allows us to get the Glimpse Beyond off before they swing into combat here, and that's a really, really big deal. That means we're going to be able to get an additional blocker in the form of this 4/4 body that we wouldn't have otherwise had if he just took that attack right there. So we're perfectly happy with that. Now he swings with everything, and we've got an interesting block position to consider. Now, we want to kill the Elise, so the 4/4 blocking the Elise I think is pretty self-explanatory. The 2/2 spiders into the 1/1 spider I think is pretty obvious as well. I mean, we're just taking units off the board, taking spider tags off the board, and keeping our units alive. Now, that's important. We've already triggered a death for Dawnspeakers, so we don't need to sacrifice any spiders to the horror. We want to keep our spiders alive so that they're going to get buffed again. And one last important thing about that block was we didn't use Dawnspeakers to block. I'm actually going to pause real quick and explain why we didn't use Dawnspeakers to block there. Effectively, it's pretty simple. We don't want Dawnspeakers to have an opportunity to be killed. While it does have 4 HP, and while you can use it to block in a pinch, reasonably speaking, A, it doesn't buff itself, so it doesn't heal itself, so it can be pretty vulnerable. And B, you really want to play around specific removal in Runeterra. If we blocked the Hapless Aristocrat even, we'd be giving them the token unit a little bit early, so it wouldn't be doing an incredible amount. But most importantly, we'd be setting our Dawnspeakers to 3 health, and Shadow Isles has a pretty crazy amount of 3 damage pings. Black Spear being the most noteworthy, Grasp of the Undying, probably secondary, and the Box as well. So when you're playing against the Shadow Isles deck, be very careful of putting your units to 3 health. Anyway, moving on, we got a Dawnspeaker proc again, as you can see there, just buffed our units up a little bit bigger, and we draw another Crawling Sensation as well. So we've got a hand that's very flexible, and as you can see, our board is definitely starting to get out of control stats-wise. 5 mana here, we're going to go ahead and take an early aggressive open swing. The first important thing to consider is we always want 1 unit to die, maybe a little bit more sometimes, but at least 1 unit needs to die, so that Dawnspeakers is going to go off again. So we can swing with everything except for Dawnspeakers. Got a couple of trades there. 2 of my units die in this case, but that's totally fine, because I've got double Crawling Sensation in hand, which is going to give me the ability to basically just go super wide and effectively just offer up a devastating amount of stats that the opponent can't control. Now, this is exactly the point, where you might be seeing like why we are running War Chefs instead of Lucian. Like when you see this combo played out, really it's so powerful that the only thing that really gives it trouble is like a nut draw, which is generally true for every deck, or Avalanche. So, if the opponent isn't running Avalanche, I'm not really threatened by that. So I can make assumptions, like let's assume the opponent is running Avalanche, and I can run War Chefs, which is normally a bit of a weaker card. Okay, the opponent in this case is going to go ahead and swing with everything on their attack step, and we want to make sure we're going to block in this pattern so that one of our spiders gets sacrificed to the Arachnoid Sentry. And of course, that's necessary for 1 death to trigger our Dawnspeakers. So you see the pattern at this point. Basically, we're just hammering this point. There's a few different things we can do here to clean up, but why not just play a Radiant Guardian? Radiant Guardian is effectively offering a little bit like more of kind of like a mid-game potential to this deck, while giving you lifesteal, which is a really great tool against other aggro decks. If you're, against like a Shark Chariot deck or an Elite deck, or even a mirror matchup, this is a great card to draw to help race them down, especially because when it gets buffed, you have a 6/6 with lifesteal, which is very powerful and scales off of your attack. Alright, so the game is effectively closed out here. We can just show the final couple of moves, but I mean, you guys can see how this is going. I'm not gonna pretend like this isn't gonna end very fast. We're just gonna go ahead and swing for it all, and as you can see, there's pretty much nothing going to be stopping me from cleaning up next round. Actually, this is an unfortunate circumstance. There's no way for me to trigger Dawnspeakers here. As you can see, my board is full, and I have no units at 1 health for Vile Feast to be able to kill. If I could have killed one of my units there, then I absolutely would have, and then I would have even taken that opportunity to play a Vanguard Redeemer, and buffed everything, including the new Redeemer that I had played. Alright, and that's going to be it. I mean, we can take effectively the rest of the swing here and clean up. So I think this is a fairly clean demonstration of like how powerful this deck is. There's a lot of different ways you can draw out for it to be super good. In that case, we saw me draw a couple of Crawling Sensations, which seems very powerful, of course. But if you just end up drawing, I mean, pretty much anything else, anything in the deck is really good. The combos with like Cursed Keeper, the combos with like, Cursed Keeper into Butcher. You can even do very aggressive like turn 1 Hapless Aristocrats into Butchers and stuff like that. For like early pressure if you're attacking on turn 1. The deck basically just does not run out of combos, and it's for that reason why it is my pick for one of the strongest decks in the game. Look out for this one, because I might be crafting this deck on day 1 when Runeterra launches, and we can all hit up ladder to see who can race up the fastest. It's going to be definitely a very fun week. Alright boys, that's going to be it for me. and I'll see you guys next time.